Today, we're going back to a time when temple doors were opened with steam, about an old Greek man who invented a vending machine 2,000 years before Starbucks, about inventions not meant to change history. We're going to talk about the Greeks, not through philosophy, not through war, not through mythology, but through gears, through levers. Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory, boring ancient history stories for sleep. Before we begin, if you genuinely feel this is a cozy place to take shelter late at night, please like and subscribe, but only if you really want to. Just like the rules in an old tavern, only if you need a quiet place. And do you know what I love the most? Looking at the comments, seeing where you're from, and what time it is for you. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 in the morning or 5 in the morning, you're still here. And I see you. Now turn off the lights, turn on a small fan if you have one. Not because it's hot, but for that gentle humming sound. You're standing in front of an ancient temple gate. The wind is dry, your hands are dusty. A silver-bearded priest is lighting a fire on an altar, and you, still not believing your eyes, watch the giant door slowly open. No one touches it, not a sound of pushing, just heat rising, and the gods seem to respond. You take a step back. The person next to you is already kneeling. They believe Zeus is listening to their prayer. But you, feeling a little out of place, see something else. A copper pipe system. Heron wasn't a priest, nor a sorcerer. He was just an engineer, the kind who watches boiling water and says, "This could push something." Heron saw magic in pressure, and he didn't need anyone to believe. He just needed it to work. It wasn't magic. It was Heron of Alexandria. And what you just witnessed was a temple gate opened by steam. A clever illusion he called applied science. Heron hid a pot of water right under the altar. When the fire heated the pot, the steam pressure rose, flowing through sealed pipes into another closed container. The force moved a liquid, and thanks to a counterweight mechanism, the door moved like magic. No batteries, no electricity, just physics and the human heart. Strangely enough, the Greeks could open a gate with steam, but still drew water by hand. Because to them, technology didn't have to serve utility. Technology was theatre. It was the beauty of possibility, not necessarily usefulness. The Greeks didn't just invent philosophy. They invented how to make you believe in something, even if that thing was just hot air pushing a pulley. The scariest part wasn't that they pretended there were gods. It was that they knew very well the gods did nothing, and still built a complex enough system to make others kneel. Does that make you sad? Today, you walk into a supermarket. The sliding door opens. You don't feel moved. You don't bow your head. You don't think you're entering a sacred place. Heron would be disappointed. His door opened, and people wept. A brilliant invention was born, not to improve life, but to preserve illusion. And you'll see more things like that. Mechanisms that move, devices that roar, breathe, spin, measure, calculate. But they all share one root: skepticism disguised as faith. You may not believe in gods, but you'll believe in gears. And tonight, we'll see that divinity is just a cleverly run mechanism, hidden behind steam and the human heart. You're thirsty. You walk up to a small temple at the corner of the Alexandria marketplace. There's a shiny metal vessel placed in front. On it, a hand-engraved sign reads, "Drop a coin, holy water shall come." You think it's a joke, until you drop a small coin. Click. A stream of cool water pours out, just the right amount. The Greeks called that stream pure water, and it's beautiful when purity is summoned not by a spell, but by a coin, no more, no less. And when you try to drop in another coin, it refuses. You've just experienced an ancient vending machine, designed by Heron of Alexandria, the eccentric old man with a passion for making lifeless objects serve. The machine doesn't look much different from a statue. A tall pipe leads from the top of the vessel. Inside is a system of flipping valves. When the coin is heavy enough, it presses a lever, releasing a stream of water. When the coin slides off, the lever resets. No loud sound, just a soft click. The mechanism is as simple as a primitive line of code. A coin drops, pushes a lever. The lever opens a valve. Water flows. When the coin slips out of place, the valve closes. No AI, no Wi-Fi, just gravity, levers, and understanding how things move. The Greeks didn't invent machines to live better. They invented them to make the world less surprising. If the coin always falls correctly, if the valve always opens at the right moment, then at least in a world full of war, there's one little machine that always keeps its promise. The Greeks thought about automation before we even had the word automatic. Not to sell things, not for profit, but because logic was a joy. You can imagine Heron in his workshop, not in a boardroom or an engineering conference, but among wooden tools, copper scraps, and a cold cup of tea, mumbling, "If this pushes that, and if water is the reward, then people will drop a coin." Why? Because I like seeing systems work. Today, we program. The Greeks mechanized logic. You write a line of code. They bent a piece of copper. You add a sensor. They placed a stone in the right spot. Both wanted one thing. When I do A, give me B. And please don't mess up the rhythm. But here's the strange thing. No one knows why Heron thought it up. There's no record saying he had to invent it. No call for investment. No one placed an order. No government requested it. He just found joy in making a coin matter. "I don't need to be believed," Heron might have written. "I just need the valve to close when the coin drops. As for the flowing water, that's between you and the universe." Have you ever done something just because you liked watching it work? A DIY toy car, a looped piece of code, a mousetrap you never actually used? If so, then you're more like Heron than you think. You know what a fidget spinner is, right? That toy kids hold between their fingers, spinning wildly, just to spin. Now imagine you're an old Greek man, living 2,000 years ago, and you build a spinner powered by steam. Not for entertainment, not to run a factory, but just so it spins. Aeolipoli, Heron's invention, looked like a hollow brass sphere mounted on two pivots. Inside it held water, and two small nozzles were attached off-center on opposite sides. When heated, the steam passed through those off-axis nozzles. Steam shot out, creating thrust by Newton's third law, and the sphere spun at wild speed. Inside was water. When heated, steam went through two small off-center spouts. The steam jetted out, creating reactive force, spinning the sphere at crazy speed. No one rode it. No one used it to cook rice. No one turned it into a chariot engine. It just spun. And Heron, in his little wooden workshop, probably sat and watched it spin for hours. No one paid Heron. No one asked what he needed. And he needed nothing, except to see something start spinning because he thought it should spin, with a smile that only the lonely and overly intelligent can understand. You might ask, so what's the point? The most honest answer: to see if it spins. Vitruvius mentioned it. Heron developed it. And 1700 years later, the world finally realized steam can power an entire industrial empire if you let it out the right way. And when it spins, it becomes the first jet engine in human history. It serves no purpose. It produces no output. It's an idea that didn't need to be applied right away. But it's beautiful, and it works, and that's enough. Imagine you're living in the 1st century. No electricity, no computers, no sponsors. You boil water, and the sphere spins. You nod. You don't take notes. You don't upload to YouTube. You don't call the press. There's just the spin. And you, the one who knows you've just done something that might outlive time. Some things just spin, like Earth, like Mars, like thoughts in your head that go nowhere each night. But as long as they spin, you're still here. Heron needed no praise, and the Aeolipoli needed no purpose. It's proof that creativity doesn't always need a reason. That sometimes the greatest thing you do is when no one told you to do it. If you've ever sat for hours just watching a fan spin, or a pointless piece of code loop endlessly on your screen, then you understand Heron. You're not alone. You're spinning with the Aeolipoli. You're standing on a white stone wall. In the distance, the dust of war rises like cooking smoke from a giant kitchen. You hear commands shouted in Greek, and then, instead of a single whoosh, you hear 10 in a row. Not rain, not thunder, but arrows, fired in succession, without pause, without needing to be restrung. The one who designed the polybolos was Philo of Byzantium. Not a warrior, but an engineer. He didn't study spear fighting. He studied the motion of gears, and he was given a task: make shooting arrows as precise as a water clock. That was the polybolos, an automatic arrow firing machine, considered the first machine gun in history. No gunpowder, no electricity, just levers, gears, bowstrings, and one guiding principle: if one shot is good, then 10 shots are better. Its structure resembled a giant crossbow mounted on a frame. Philo loaded arrows into a long tube. Each time the gear turned, the tube slid and dropped an arrow into the groove. A mechanical arm pulled the bowstring tight. The gear released, the arrow flew, and so it went, uninterrupted. A death manually programmed, mechanically operated, and very consistent. A gear spun to pull the bowstring. A sliding mechanism automatically loaded arrows from the container. The gear kept turning. The string pulled again, the next arrow already waiting. When working properly, it could shoot 10 to 15 arrows per minute, each one flying with the same force, same direction. No time for trembling hands, no emotions to hold back. The polybolos didn't kill out of anger. It killed because it was designed to. You thought Heron only made toys and water machines? No, it was people like him, or his predecessors, who created this, not for display, not for amusement, but to kill more efficiently. And that is the darkest side of intellect, when creativity is used to accelerate death. The Greeks loved beauty. They carved statues, built temples, wrote poetry, but they also invented a way to turn battle into an industrial chain of blood. No longer one archer, one arrow. Now, a machine did the job, and did it faster, colder. No hatred needed, just gears. Heron and his predecessors saw this no differently than a math problem. From Philo to drones, it's only 2,000 years, but the coldness is the same. You pull the string, the machine fires, You don't have to look at anyone. How to shorten the time between two shots. How to remove emotion from action. You're standing in a trench, watching a rain of arrows stab the ground just inches from your toes. No breathing, no warriors shouting, just the familiar sound. Click, whoosh, click, whoosh, click, whoosh. The machine keeps running. You stop breathing. And if you ever thought technology only serves peace, remember that one of humanity's first mechanical inventions was meant to help death arrive faster. You wake up on a morning far, far away. No alarm, no buzzing phone, just a short stone post tilted into the ground and a shadow silently creeping across a line. No hands, no bells, no ding to tell you you're late. Just moving light and time following behind like a proud cat. Before every Olympic game, people watched the shadow. Before every prayer, they timed it with sunlight. No countdowns, only light and patience. The sundial, or heliometer, was one of the first ways the Greeks used to measure time. Not because they were in a rush, but because they wanted to know where they stood in the motion of the universe. They didn't just let the shadow fall at random. They calculated the tilt. They carved each line by season. Every sundial was a love letter sent to the sky, with a hope. Please tell me where I am in the infinite. The principle was as simple as a poem. You stick a gnomon, standing rod, into a flat surface. The sun casts a shadow over the marks, and every time the shadow touches a point, an hour is named. No electricity, no spring mechanism, just the sun not giving up on you. Chronos is the time measured by the shadow. Kairos is the moment you feel like you should sit and breathe. And perhaps both matter equally. The Greeks called shadow skia. To them, the shadow wasn't just the result of light. It was storytelling. It was a reminder. Time is passing, even if you're not running. You sit beside that post and realize every shadow is a real trace. Not loud like an alarm clock, not constant like a digital watch, but the very slow breathing of the cosmos. The sundial doesn't work at night, doesn't work when it's cloudy, doesn't work when you hide indoors, but that's what makes it more beautiful. It only works when you step out and look at the real world. You can't fast forward a shadow, can't hit snooze, can't trick it into slowing down because you're not ready. Time, to the Greeks, wasn't to be managed, but to be listened to. You could stand next to that stone post all day and hear no ticking, but you'll see that the noontime shadow is very short, and by evening, it stretches like a tired sigh. And if tonight you can't sleep because the clock beside your bed keeps blinking, remember that there was a time when we told time by watching a shadow glide across the dust. You're sitting on a wooden cart, swaying under the sunlight of Attica. The wheels turn, dust rises, each meter of road passes, leaving no trace. But then you hear click, then another click. Each time the wheel spins a certain number of turns, a small pebble drops into a little box beneath the seat. You've just travelled one stade, and the cart has remembered it. It was Vitruvius, the famous Roman architect, who described the odometer in his book. Not a philosopher, not a monk, but someone who needed precise road length to redraw the maps of an entire empire. That was the odometer, the ancient Greeks' first distance measuring device. No GPS, no digital map, just gears, a wooden drum, string, and a counting pebble. Each wheel rotation passed through a series of gears, and after a certain number, an off-center shaft dropped a pebble. All to measure, each 147-meter stretch. accurate down to the very stone. The way it worked was so simple, it became beautiful. A rotating shaft attached to the wheel. Every certain number of rotations, a gear moved. At the right point, a small pebble fell into a wooden box. You count the pebbles. You know how far you've gone. No looking, no measuring, just listening to the falling stone. Without the odometer, there would be no maps, no clear boundaries. No one would know where they stood within the empire. Only the pebbles told that story. You didn't have to be a soldier, merchant, or scholar. Just someone who wanted to know how far they'd come. And the Greeks, in a world blurred by bad maps, chose to let memory rest inside stones. Engineers like Archimedes or Vitruvius might have described it, or Roman administrators using it to draw maps, measure land, divide territories. Travel was no longer footstep guesses. It became numbers. It became mechanics. It became the steady fall of pebbles, like the heartbeat of the road. The odometer didn't help you go faster. It just let you know you were going. And sometimes, that's all you need. Do you remember how many times in life you didn't know how far you had come? You couldn't see the road. You couldn't see the finish line. Just a vague echo inside. Maybe I've gone a little way. No one records every meter of ground you've crossed, but the odometer keeps it for you. It doesn't judge, doesn't encourage. It just drops pebbles and remembers for you what you couldn't bear to look back at. The odometer, with its gentle pebble taps, doesn't tell you where you are. It just says, you've moved, and that matters. And if tonight you still feel lost, remember that some once traveled hundreds of miles just to hear pebbles fall into a wooden box, and know that they weren't standing still. You're standing in a muddy field. Water floods your ankles. The sky is still raining, and the rice plants are looking at you, almost blaming you. Across the ditch, clean water sits calmly, higher than the field you're standing in, close, but unreachable, like sleep when you have insomnia. Then someone, not a farmer, not a priest, walks up and says, "I'll spin the water down for you." No chanting, no digging, just spinning. According to Pliny the Elder, Archimedes created this screw while in Egypt, where the Nile is gentle, but farmland sits above it. He looked at the water, looked at farmers scooping bucket after bucket, and thought, why not let the water climb by itself? That was the Archimedes screw, a spiral shaft, one of the most humble yet enduring inventions in history. Inside is a twisted coil placed inside a tilted hollow tube. As you turn the handle, the spiral motion pushes water upward, one step at a time. No chains, no gears, just geometry and patient rotation. You turn the handle, and the water from below begins to crawl upward along the spiral. No magic, just mechanics and patience. Archimedes, a mathematician, an engineer, and a little bit of a poet, figured out how to politely trick gravity. Archimedes didn't teach you to fight water. He taught you to invite it along. Each rotation, gentle, steady, without resistance. Like the way you handle a tiring day, not by pushing, but by spiraling through it. He didn't fight water. He invited it to climb, bit by bit, one little swirl at a time. From Egypt to Rome, from Babylon to China, anywhere fields needed water, there was some version of this screw. No one remembers who turned it first, but everyone knows, where there's a spiral, there's life. That spiral screw was used to irrigate fields, drain water from mines, feed the hanging gardens of Babylon, if you believe that legend. And later, in submarines, factories, and industrial sludge pipes, it didn't boom, didn't impress, but it kept working, quietly, steadily. If you've ever twisted a bottle cap, squeezed toothpaste, turned a faucet, you've touched Archimedes' idea. He didn't build temples, didn't write epics. He just wrote a way to let water go upstream without being forced. A spiral isn't a straight line. It doesn't take you to the finish right away. It takes you around, again, slowly, upward, like healing. You don't jump out of sorrow. You spiral out of it, loop by loop. You may not remember ever seeing that screw, but if one day you see water crawling up a pipe like a lazy snake, bow your head gently. Someone 2,000 years ago set it in motion, because that farmer couldn't wait for the rain. And if tonight you're still tossing and turning, sleepless, imagine your water. And somewhere, an invisible spiral is lifting you out of the trench of exhaustion. You're sitting on a ship's deck, the smell of salt, rotten wood, and ropes creaking against the mast. Far ahead is the shore of Syracuse, and nearby, the first scream as the sail catches fire, not from cannons, not from gods, but from a mirror. When the Romans came to besiege Syracuse, Archimedes didn't pick up a sword. He picked up a compass. Instead of building thick walls, he drew leverage diagrams. And among the things he came up with was a mirror. What Archimedes used, possibly, wasn't just one mirror, but dozens, maybe hundreds of small ones, arranged into a curved surface, so that light wouldn't just shine, but converge like a flaming spear. They say Archimedes, during the siege of Syracuse, held a polished bronze mirror and used reflected sunlight to set enemy ships ablaze. A fire born not from wood, but from mathematics, from light, from a mind that refused to be just a tool. This story, for centuries, has been repeated in three tones: amazement, skepticism, and a little jealousy. Did Archimedes really do it? In 2005, a group of Greek students recreated the experiment by the shore. 70 bronze mirrors, a model ship made of dry wood. 10 minutes later, flames appeared. Not fast, but enough for a legend to live a few more centuries. MIT once tried and failed. A modern Greek team tried again and succeeded, but only under ideal conditions. No wind, ship must be still, and the sky must shine like a poem about sunlight. So is it real? Archimedes didn't fight to win. He fought to prove that thinking, even old, could stop young soldiers. It wasn't science serving weapons. It was weapons, forced to kneel before intellect. No one knows. And that's the most beautiful part. You don't need to know if it's real. You just need to know that someone made the whole world take imagination seriously. That mirror, whether it burned ships or not, burned something else. The belief that the human mind could bend war. The Romans had soldiers. Archimedes had mirrors, and a wild belief in the power of light. It wasn't magic. It was science, with the scent of myth. You might laugh at the image of an old Greek man, standing in his yard, tilting a mirror like a kid playing with sunlight. But maybe he didn't need to burn the ship. He just needed the enemy to believe he could, and that was enough. A genius doesn't just make tools. They make legends, and leave behind a fear that still smolders in history. And if tonight you feel your own light is dimming, remember that even a small mirror can make a big ship start to fear. You're standing in the middle of an ancient Greek construction site. No sirens, no excavators, just stone, and the creaking of wood, and A man lifting an entire pillar with his hands without even breathing hard. Not because he's a god, but because he has a pulley. Egypt built pyramids with hands and sloped ramps. The Greeks used math, and Archimedes didn't invent the pulley, but turned it into a principle that let humans negotiate with gravity. If the wheel was the invention that helped humans go farther, then the pulley was what helped them go up without breaking their backs. The pulley, seemingly simple, is a grooved wheel used to redirect pulling force. When you add more wheels to a system, you don't just redirect, you divide the weight. You trade pain for time and helplessness for rhythm. Archimedes once said, "Give me a place to stand and I will move the earth." People laughed. Then he did it with a pulley. In Athens, they installed wheels as big as watermills. Workers walked inside them, and massive stone columns began to rise. No magic, just people walking in wheels, and wheels lifting temples. At construction sites like the Parthenon, the Greeks didn't just build by hand. They built turning cranes, with rotating shafts, wheels and pulley systems, using human strength, but smarter than brute strength. No engines, just math. And wood, posts, ropes, spinning wheels, like a mechanical poem. It didn't just lift stones. The pulley also lifted gods. At Greek theatres, they used pulleys to lower actors from the sky, like Zeus descending. It didn't just raise heavy objects, it raised belief. You think a 10-ton column needs hundreds of people? No, just one person and 3 pulleys. The Greeks didn't see pulleys as cheating. They saw them as the rightful logic of physics. Not using force to push the world, but using knowledge to reconcile with it. The Greeks didn't build with strength. They built with understanding. By breaking force into smaller parts people could bear. And you know what? They didn't just build temples. They built the belief that this world, no matter how heavy, can still be lifted if you know how to tie the ropes. Maybe what you need now isn't strength, but a small pulley system to split the weight in half. One part you carry, one part entrusted to the minds of those who came before you. Today, modern cranes can lift entire buildings, but their soul is still a wooden wheel spinning in silence, just like the one Archimedes used to prove that wisdom too can build temples. And if tonight life feels too heavy, imagine yourself tying a small rope connected to some invisible pulley system, not to lift the world, just to lift yourself a little bit off the ground. Night falls over Athens, the whole city, silent as if holding its breath, because tonight there's a play. You squeeze into the crowd, packed with whispers. The theatre is half a hillside, the stage empty, just the wind. And a child beside you whispers, "A god will appear from the sky." You smile, then look up and see an old man with a white beard in a white robe, descending from the air, not touching the ground. Everyone holds their breath. So do you. Not a god, an actor, and not a miracle, but a system of pulleys, gears, and spinning shafts behind the curtain, called by the Greeks with a poetic name, Mechane. Euripides used the Mechane more than anyone. In his plays, gods didn't just intervene, they solved logical dead ends, a stage lever, and also an emergency button for tragedy. The Mechane structure was simple: a tall wooden post, a pulley at the top, long ropes, and 2 people backstage pulling on cue. Just a few steps, but it created the greatest illusion in theatre history. Mechane, the first stage machine in history, not a prop, an invention. a hidden lift system behind the scenes, raising actors up or bringing them down from the sky. It served something more important than mythology, the audience's emotion. This was the first time in history humans recreated gods through engineering. Ropes, pulleys, wooden gears, carefully controlled to produce a 5-second moment. A god descending from the sky to end a tragedy. Today, Deus ex machina is called a writing flaw. But in ancient Greece, it was an admission that humanity had reached the edge of what it could understand. At that point, what came down wasn't convenience, it was mercy. And so a new phrase was born, Deus ex machina, meaning God from the machine. It wasn't just a storytelling trick, it was technology nodding at belief. You see, the Greeks didn't just believe in gods, they believed in the ability to make others believe, even just for 10 seconds, even if it was only an illusion. McCain wasn't strong, wasn't fast, just timely. And you know what? That moment when the actor descended, it wasn't in the script. It was in the heart of the audience. Technology only reached that far, then stepped back. Maybe today you no longer believe in gods, but sometimes we still sit in the dark, waiting for something to descend from above to deliver us. An afternoon in Syracuse, an old man in a white robe holding a long stick presses it into the ground, stares into the distance, and says, "Give me a place to stand, and I will lift the earth." People laughed, and perhaps the earth shivered a little. That sentence wasn't a metaphor, it was a physics formula. A lever, a fulcrum, and a long enough beam could change the world. The structure is simple, a rod, a fulcrum, a force. When you change the position of the force and the object, you change the fate of movement. Archimedes didn't need to know Newton. He just needed the right angle. The lever is the simplest principle in mechanics, but it was also the first to make humans feel they could do what gods did. A wooden beam, a pivot point. You press down on one end, and the other end lifts, something your hands could never lift alone. Archimedes didn't invent the lever, but he understood it down to the bone. He used it to lift stones, move ships, build structures, and move the faith of his time toward the power of knowledge. Plutarch wrote that King Hero II didn't believe, so Archimedes, to prove it, built an entire system of levers, pulleys, and a rotating shaft in front of the king. He pulled a rope with one hand, and a large ship, full of people, slowly left the dock, as if summoned by reason. No shouting, no pushing, just one man and one principle. Romans would later tell of him using a system of levers, pulleys, and rotating shafts to pull an entire warship out of the harbor by himself. No hype, no drama, just the right force, in the right place. The Greeks didn't see the world as an enemy to conquer. They saw it as a partner to understand. The lever doesn't defeat weight, it negotiates with it, and Archimedes was the greatest negotiator. And that's what Archimedes left behind, not a tool, but a principle. If you cannot win by force, win by where you stand. His whole life was a negotiation with force, not resisting gravity, not fighting weight, just shifting angles. Where you stand, how you hold, and what you use as a pivot can turn helplessness into advantage. And that's not just physics, that's life. Today, you don't need a lever to lift the earth, but you need a fulcrum to shift yourself, a value, a habit, a friend. Anything, steady enough, trusted enough, still enough. And you just need a wooden rod and a little courage to start pushing. Night falls, the lights dim, but not because the city is sleeping. It's because the sky has started to shine, and you, sitting beneath a tree in the yard, look up. Your eyes see nothing but a dark, endless night. But then, slowly, you begin to see sparkling dots, and suddenly, they connect into shapes. You see Orion's comb. You see stars dancing like a ritual. And then you remember, these stars aren't just for looking. They are a map. The ancient Greeks didn't look at the sky like you and I. They didn't just see twinkles. They saw a book opening, a giant map being drawn by stars, each star a marker, a story, an event, a myth. They looked up and saw the universe had order, and that order wasn't random. It was divided into constellations, rotating circles around each other. From those stars, they measured time. From Orion, they knew winter had arrived. From the North Star, they found their way. And every star, every constellation, had its own meaning. Can you imagine? These Greeks sat under this same night sky and saw the universe not as something distant, but as a painting that told history, fate, and even dreams. They didn't just draw maps of land, they drew maps of time. Astronomers like Hipparchus studied and recorded the precise positions of stars. Priests like Pythagoras thought the sky was a system of eternal music, and philosophers like Plato saw the heavens as the reflection of abstract theories. One way the ancient Greeks saw the universe was as a love letter sent to the sky, not to get a reply, but to tell a story. And every star in that sky was like a message, an unfinished wish. So if tonight you feel lost, try looking up. Maybe the stars will show you a way. Not because they know what you need, but because something very old, very far away, is still sending you a love letter, meant for those who know how to look. A windless morning in the city of Rhodes. You're clearing bricks behind the house when you hear the sound of metal clinking. You turn and see a machine made of bronze, walking. You think you're dreaming, but it's what the Greeks called an automaton. Not a creature, not a tool, but an object programmed to live. The ancient Greeks didn't just invent levers, pulleys, or star maps. They also imagined machines that could move, not to kill, not to conquer, but to be your companion. One of the most famous stories is about Talos, a giant made of bronze forged by the god Hephaestus, programmed to protect the island of Crete. Every day, Talos would walk once around the shoreline, not because of orders, but because of built-in duty. Talos couldn't speak, couldn't laugh, but he never abandoned his task. And you know what? That's all people really hope for in a friend. Then came Archytas. He built a steam-powered dove that could fly for a short distance, not to deliver mail, but to test whether willpower could be transferred through engineering. Steam pushed, metal flapped, and for a few seconds, a piece of bronze dreamed it was a bird. These ancient machines, operated by pulleys, gears, heated water, and cords, were the earliest mechanical dreams of artificial life. They weren't perfect, but they knew how to move, how to repeat, how to keep a promise. And most importantly, they were there with humans. When you're camping alone in the cold night, a machine ticking steadily like a breath beside you, you suddenly realize a steady rhythm can substitute presence. Over 2,000 years later, we build robots to babysit, to care for the elderly, to talk with us. And the question isn't much different from before. Can something without a heart understand the heart? The answer is maybe not, but it's still there. And sometimes, when you're drowning in anxiety, a machine humming softly beside you can still make you feel a little less alone. You know, the ancient Greeks didn't have to make those things. They weren't required to invent star maps. No one demanded they build a steam machine just to spin meaninglessly. No one forced them to measure light, record the sky's movement, or make gods descend onto the stage by pulley. They didn't need to leave anything behind, but they still did. They created things that went far beyond survival, beyond war, beyond taxes, beyond harvests. They did it because they had imagination, and maybe because they were lonely. They built temples with levers, drew timelines with the sun's shadow, and sent love letters to the sky with stars. They made measuring wheels no one asked for. They redrew the map of the world through the sound of turning shafts. They rigged pulleys for theatre, just so Zeus could descend at the right moment. And you know what? It wasn't because they thought they were great. It was because they couldn't stand the idea of things just drifting by without explanation. Today, you can have everything. Computers, GPS, spacecraft. But on a sad night, you still open YouTube and type, history for sleep, ancient inventions. Why people built useless things? Because you don't just need sleep. You need to know that someone before you also once looked up and made something that no one asked for, no one rewarded, no one remembered. But because of it, you feel a little less alone. You are not alone in your imagination, because there were people who used steam to breathe for dreams, used metal to walk for the heart, used light to hold on to time. And if you're still awake tonight, remember, some things are born for no one, not for fame, not for money, not for victory, just because they couldn't not make them. And maybe you're the same. Epic of Gilgamesh, Sumerian myth. In a land once where two rivers met, where the mud is thicker than time, a name still echoes although more than 4,000 years have passed. Not the name of a god, not that of a famous conqueror in history books, but of a human being, engraved on clay, then buried, and finally rediscovered. Gilgamesh. He lived in Uruk, an ancient city in Mesopotamia, where humans first built walls, planted gardens, held rituals for the gods. He was no ordinary man. Born of a goddess and a king, Gilgamesh was a demigod, tall, beautiful, extraordinary. A being with human form, yet he walked like the ground should make way. He is the first king recorded in writing, and the first figure in human literature to fear death. Before him, humanity had never dared ask, "Where will I go when everything disappears?" Gilgamesh asked it. And for thousands of years after, humanity has been trying to find the answer in his story. Extended note, Uruk, ruled by Gilgamesh, was not just mythic backdrop. It was the first city in history built with fired brick, had walls, temples, and writing. In the epic, Uruk is both Gilgamesh's pride and the mirror of his arrogance. From archaeological remains to ancient texts, all show one truth. Gilgamesh was not just a king. He embodied ambition beyond human limits. Gilgamesh was more than a king. He was a demigod, born of the goddess Ninsun and a priest-king. Power wasn't something he achieved. It was part of him from birth. He was taller than all other men, his beauty sculpted by the light of dawn, his mind as fast as a spring flood, and his body never tired. He needed no one to teach him leadership. From his first steps, He was told the world was his alone. And so, he acted that way. He built Uruk's first city walls, so high even birds dared not fly over. He erected temples, open plazas, mapped fruit gardens that only he could harvest. Gilgamesh made the people proud of their city, but at the same time, they feared the very hand that built it. Gilgamesh was unchecked, not by councils, not by religion, not by laws. In a society where gods and humans intermingled, he was the only one who feared neither. That made him like a system bug in the order the Sumerians tried to preserve. From the temple of Ishtar to clay tablet inscriptions, he appeared both as a builder and as a warning. No one, not even a demigod, should hold all power alone. He forced people to carve statues of him, not in temples, but in marketplaces. He commanded poets to write praises of his strength, not during festivals, but every morning. He decreed that every newlywed bride must visit him before her wedding night. That was the privilege of a king, and he believed it was the law of the heavens. No one dared speak against him. Gilgamesh, with all his glory, lived in a world without reflection. No one was his equal. No one dared sit beside him without kneeling. He had everything: power, beauty, a city, yet not a single friend. And like all humans, even a demigod, Gilgamesh slowly felt that emptiness. What he lacked was not trophies, but an honest gaze, unafraid. But when night fell, in his small chamber, beside dying embers, prayers began to rise, not to Gilgamesh, but to the gods. Please give us someone who can stop him. Do what humanity cannot. And one day, in the early morning mist, that prayer was answered. In Sumerian culture, clay wasn't just building material, but the substance of life. The gods, by myth, molded humans from the mud of the Tigris and Euphrates. When Gilgamesh exceeded his limit, the gods didn't punish him with lightning, but with the very substance that birthed him. A new being also from earth, but carrying opposition. Wild, rustic, pure. That was Enkidu, the gentle yet weighty answer from the universe. Not by thunder, not by war, but by a lump of clay, kneaded with the breath of the plain winds. In ancient symbolism, Enkidu was not just a rival, but the primal self lost within every civilized person. If Gilgamesh represented order, power, and what was written, then Enkidu embodied what had never been named: nature, instinct, and raw feeling. When the gods sent Enkidu, they not only corrected wrongs, they reignited the part of a person that Gilgamesh himself had lost. Enkidu was not born from divine blood or royal lineage. He was the embodiment of the undefined human. He knew no shame, no language, no concept of power or guilt. Inside him was a soul never bound, living fully by nature's rhythms, without schemes, defiance, or need for validation. He was the part of nature that civilization abandoned to enter history. He was shaped from primeval mud, by winds blowing across the Sumerian plains, where lions once roamed with humans. He had thick, animal-like hair, a body covered in dust and wind. He lived among gazelles, drank river water with lions, slept on wild grass, ignorant of the concept human. Enkidu wore nothing, spoke no language, but his eyes held something strange, a wordless understanding of the world. Within him was natural balance. He worshipped no one, ruled no one, asked for nothing beyond warm sun and enough cool breeze to feel alive. Then the human world encountered him. A hunter saw Enkidu by the river, naked, but silencing the animals. No one dared hunt when Enkidu was near. No trap worked. So the hunter was afraid and reported to the temple. The priest sent Shamhat, a priestess and sacred harlot, to meet him. Not to teach, but to make love. For 7 days and nights, Enkidu lived with Shamhat in ecstasy. In Sumerian culture, temple harlots weren't seen as impure. On the contrary, they connected humans with gods through bodies. The sexual act there wasn't a mere seduction, but a sacred transformation ritual. 7 nights with Shamhat were 7 nights of rebirth, where Enkidu was open to sensation, language, memory, and even pain. It was a baptism by intimacy, bringing a wild soul into the human world, where everything had a name and a price, not instinct, but a transformative rite, a fleshly apocalypse. After those 7 nights, Enkidu was no longer a creature of nature. He returned to the beasts, but they fled. He drank river water, but found it bitter. He looked at his body, and for the first time, felt shame. Shamhat fed him bread, wine, clothed him in linen. She taught him how to sit, speak, slowly chew cooked meat. Each time Enkidu learned a human behavior, eating, dressing, speech, posture, it marked his departure from his original wild nature. His evolution came not with joy, but with silent bewilderment. What had been instinct became alien. As if, learning language, he also dropped the primal howl that nature once understood. In each step forward lay a hidden loss, and Enkidu felt it, not with reason, but with flesh. Enkidu learned quickly, but with each gesture of humanity, he lost something nameless. When he heard about a king in Uruk, tall, proud, and taking brides from the city, Enkidu stood up. What angered Enkidu wasn't a personal insult, but an offense to a deep natural principle within him. He had never been taught of justice, but he felt injustice as a wild beast feels danger. Gilgamesh didn't only take women, he broke balance, turned weddings into a ritual sack of his ego. And thus, Enkidu, who had just learned to eat, wear clothes, feel love, also knew how to rebel. I will go. I will stop him. For the first time, nature rose against civilization. Enkidu did not arrive in Uruk by golden chariot or trumpet call. He came on bare feet, through red dust and whistling wind. The whole city seemed to hold its breath as the hairy man, his gaze full of mountain wind, entered the city gates, unafraid, without greeting, without asking permission. And then, Gilgamesh appeared. He was not used to being blocked in his way, especially not on someone else's wedding night, the night when by his law, the bride would belong to him first. But this time, Enkidu stood at the gate amid wedding drums, amid the terrified eyes of both families. No words were exchanged politely, only silence stretched on, heavy as the walls of Uruk. Gilgamesh struck first. Enkidu did not dodge. The battle began, not a brawl, but the first challenge of nature against power. 2 bodies collided, like thunder striking wet earth. Every punch shook the stone steps. Every chokehold shattered walls. The people of Uruk fled. Children cried. Torches went out. And only 2 figures rolled in the dust. 7 days, 7 nights. No one slept in Uruk. No one dared intervene. No one declared victory. Until Gilgamesh slipped. This was not just a slip of the foot, but a slip of the ego. Gilgamesh, who had never been humiliated, fell to the dusty stones. But instead of crushing him, he was lifted up. And that moment reversed everything, from competition to connection, from pride to companionship. Like a silent ritual they both understood. This battle was not to eliminate each other, but to test whose heart was large enough to accept the other. Enkidu did not take advantage. He did not kill him. And for the first time in his life, Gilgamesh, feared by all, a man without friends, embraced someone. In that instant, Uruk stopped breathing. The stone walls seemed to lean toward them. Two bodies that once collided like storms became two rivers meeting. It was no longer a victory, but recognition. Enkidu did not bow. Gilgamesh did not stand above him. For the first time, they were equal. And from that gaze, something new was born. Friendship, something that had never existed in the world of a king. Not because of victory, but because he had found something he never knew: equality. From that moment, they became friends. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, a king who had never been understood, and a being who had just learned humanity, now saw themselves in one another's eyes. It was not only the beginning of a friendship, it was the first step toward reconciling order and wilderness, power and instinct, history and the unnameable. Neither were opponents anymore, but two fractured halves who had found each other, finally knowing they could be kind, as long as they didn't stand alone. No, they became indispensable to each other. In Sumerian culture, friendship was not only closeness, it was a sacred bond, sometimes stronger than blood. In Gilgamesh's time, where everything was hierarchical, God, king, people, beasts, the alliance of such different beings was no small thing. It was a silent revolution, where the one above did not need to be higher, and the one below did not need to bow. One represented civilization, and one carried wildness. Together, they became whole. And one day, when youthful impulsiveness subsided, Gilgamesh would say, "O Enkidu, we will go far, to places no one has ever set foot, to create what no one has ever dared." And from there, the legendary journey began. When humans dare to challenge nature, the result is storm. But when a demigod dares offend the gods, the consequences are not merely death. They, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the first pair of friends in Sumerian civilization, together stepped into their first grave error. They did not go to seek understanding. They went to destroy. The target was Humbaba, the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest, an ancient entity granted protection of the border between humanity and the divine. Gilgamesh wanted to slay it, to carve his name into uncharted land. Enkidu, though hesitant, followed his friend. Perhaps for friendship. Perhaps because he was no longer the being of balance. And they did slay Humbaba. Humbaba was not just a monster. He was the embodiment of the boundary between the touchable and the untouchable. In Sumerian myth, Humbaba was tasked with guarding the cedar forest, not because he was strong, but because he was sacred. Killing Humbaba was like cutting down the pillar connecting heaven and earth. The silence that followed his death was not peaceful, but the first crack in the ancient barrier. A creature that had never harmed Uruk, a beast even gods avoided confronting. Humbaba fell after a bloody battle. His blood soaked the forest floor. The wind stopped, and before he died, he cursed them. "One of you will die soon, for you have slain the immortal without understanding why it exists." Gilgamesh did not understand, but the gods did. They returned to Uruk with their trophy, but the heavens were no longer silent. During the victory feast, Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, appeared. She courted Gilgamesh, but he refused. Not because he was wise, but because he knew all of Ishtar's former lovers faced tragic ends. Ishtar was enraged. She could not kill Gilgamesh, but she knew where he was vulnerable. She begged Anu, her father, the sky god, to send to earth a destructive being, the celestial bull. The bull came with drought, sandstorms, famine, and death. The celestial bull, or Gugalana, was not just a destructive creature. It was the god's final test. It did not kill Gilgamesh, but forced him to reveal his true nature. For Enkidu, who once held natural balance, seizing the bull's horns to bring about the killing blow was the ultimate transgression. The bull's death was not just violence, but a declaration. We no longer need gods. And to the ancient universe, that was an act of war. Uruk trembled. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu did kill it. The bull's divine blood sprayed across the city plaza. Gilgamesh even cut its flesh to hurl at Ishtar, a blasphemy unheard of in Sumerian culture. Ishtar was not just any goddess. She embodied love, war, fertility, and beauty, the forces shaping every life cycle of the Sumerian people. To reject Ishtar was one thing, but to insult her before the whole populace with the divine blood of a sacred creature was to break the sacred bond between heaven and humans. It did not just enrage her, but caused the cosmic order to recoil in silent horror. From that moment on, their fate was no longer theirs to decide. The sky fell silent, the earth no longer trembled, and for the first time, the gods convened. We created Gilgamesh, but he has exceeded his role as a half-god. We cannot let him believe there is no price to pay. And they made a decree. Enkidu must die. Why not Gilgamesh? Because Enkidu, the being born of earth, was the only one who still retained his humanity. Thus his death was a ritual sacrifice, as if nature had to withdraw from the chaos humans unleashed. In Sumerian myth, Enkidu did not die for wrongdoing, but because the world had no room for purity beside power. He was not the one who ordered the kill, but he held the horns that enabled the fatal blow. He carried instinct. He once lived true to nature. And then, Enkidu fell ill, not from plague, not from war, but because his fate had been etched onto divine stone. In Sumerian belief, fate was not negotiable. It was written by the gods, inscribed on sacred stone tablets no mortal could touch. Enkidu's death thus did not come from conflict, but from a cold decree carved long before they were born. No matter how strong, no matter how close to a king or tied to earth, when the stone calls your name, no one can step back. When the mighty have no enemies, the only thing left to fight is their own fear. Gilgamesh had conquered everything. The monster Humbaba, the celestial bull, even the pride of the gods. He had gone farther than any man had dared dream. And then, Enkidu died, not from a wound, not from battle, but from a decree, a price, an invisible inscription carved by those living across the divide. Because you slew the sacred, the human in you must die. Gilgamesh, who had never knelt, now sat by the bed, silently watching his closest friend's breath fade. Enkidu moaned. He dreamed strange dreams. He saw the gates of the underworld. He saw those once living turn to dust. He saw eternity, not on a throne, but in nameless darkness. And for the first time, Gilgamesh was afraid. Not of losing a kingdom, not of losing a throne, but afraid of his own fate. If he who wrestled with monsters, can die, what about me and when? Gilgamesh began to rage. He stopped wearing kingly robes. He ate no offerings. He slept not in the palace, He stepped out of Uruk, like a shadow in human shape, not to fight, not to build. Previously, every time Gilgamesh left the city, it was to conquer some land, some beast, some fear. But this time, he faced nothing external. So this journey would not be a campaign, but a pilgrimage of the soul. A king now walked not to stamp his mark, but to search if he still mattered once no one feared him, and to find something no one had ever held: immortality. In the ancient world, a hero was one who faced fate. But when a hero has no enemies left outside, then fate becomes the final battlefield. No map leads to immortality. Only fear and the memory of one who has fallen serve as guides. Gilgamesh left Uruk unlike anywhere before. No soldiers, no drums, only a fur cloak on his shoulders, eyes dry from sorrow, and a lingering question: how do I not die? He crossed peaks no man had crossed, met unnamed creatures, passed the sun gate where the sun rises and sets between two divine stone statues. Everywhere he went, people gasped, "Who are you to walk the path of gods?" And he replied, "I am he who buried his friend, and I do not wish to be the next." Gilgamesh reached the house of Utnapishtim, the only human granted immortality after the great flood. But instead of answers, he heard a sigh. "Even I, the lone survivor, cannot save you from death. Immortality is not a gift. It is a curse you do not yet understand." Utnapishtim recounted the flood, the ark, the family, the animals, and the loneliness after all sank. Gilgamesh listened, and deep within, his dream of immortality began to crack. Still undeterred, he was shown a final hope. Under the sea lies the tree of life. Pluck it, and you shall be renewed. Gilgamesh dove beneath the ocean, a demigod in human form, bare hands touching the sacred root. He carried it ashore. He did not eat it. He set it beside him and bathed in a spring, for the first time washing away the mud of fear. But when he returned, the tree was gone. A serpent had crawled by. It devoured the tree and shed its skin. Gilgamesh looked at the serpent's discarded skin, shiny, new, cold. He sat down and he laughed, not from sorrow, but because at last he understood. Immortality is not in the flesh, but in what is remembered. And the only one Gilgamesh wanted to remember was no longer there to hear. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk. He no longer sought immortality, but began to write. Carved on stone the name of his lost friend, penned the journey of two who once opposed, but became the most beautiful thing a king could claim, true memory. And thus, the name Gilgamesh does not live forever in flesh, but in mud, in stone, in the memory of those who know how to read and remember. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just a tale of victory and defeat. It is a book etched with silent symbols, traces unspoken, yet containing eternal truths about humanity, mortality, and life's passing. When Gilgamesh found the Tree of Life, he believed he held the key to immortality. But the serpent, the creature that quietly consumed the tree, became the greatest symbol in this tale. The serpent is not a destroyer. It is the emblem of the endless cycle where death and rebirth walk hand in hand. It sheds its skin, self-renewing. And in that act, it teaches Gilgamesh a vital lesson. Immortality is not humanity's birthright, but something that can be redone, changed, and lost. As part of nature, Gilgamesh, on his quest for immortality, left a mighty imprint on Uruk, its thick, sturdy walls. They symbolize the works humans create to live forever, not through myth or magic, but through the tangible. Uruk, the city he built, will endure in memory, yet stands as a barrier between him and what he sought. For while cities may last forever, Gilgamesh himself could not. The tree of life, though found beneath the deep sea, symbolizes the hope humanity always desires. But the tree's demise, taken by the serpent, reveals a truth. Immortality is not something humans can own, but a gift too great to hoard. The tree's loss is a reminder that whatever humans build, whatever they achieve, will one day yield space for something else. Enkidu was not just a friend, the sole companion on Gilgamesh's journey, but a symbol of purity and nature. When Enkidu died, Gilgamesh lost not just a friend, but a part of himself, a purity untainted by power or ambition. Enkidu's loss made Gilgamesh realize that loss is an inevitable part of life. Ultimately, Gilgamesh understood that immortality lies not in the body, but in what is told. His story, his search for immortality, his triumphs and failures will not be forgotten because they are carved in stone. The final silent symbol is the art of preserving memory, of living on through every line, every carved character on a stone stele. The silent symbols in the Epic of Gilgamesh are not just beautiful images. They are reminders of human limitation, that though humans can build great cities or defeat terrifying beasts, ultimately they must face what cannot be changed: death, loss, and immortality through memory. When the story of Gilgamesh ends, it is not a moment to mourn the passing of a demigod. It is a moment for us to reflect on what makes a human life eternal. Gilgamesh did not achieve immortality through the body, but he left behind a legacy that lives on in the memory of those who remained, those who have listened to his story. And throughout his journey, Gilgamesh was not merely trying to defeat death. He discovered that eternal life is not in the flesh, but in the stories, the memories we leave behind for the world. He was truly human, with all the weakness, desire, and limits that cannot be surpassed. And it is precisely this that makes his story closer to us than ever before. Gilgamesh did not live forever, but his story will. That is the legacy of a man who faced his own fate, not through power or conquest, but through friendship, loss, and acceptance. We remember Gilgamesh not because he was a demigod, but because he was human. A human who was strong, full of longing, and brave enough to face his own fear. Gilgamesh taught us an important lesson. It is not victory or immortality that truly endures, but the stories we tell, the values we build, those are what truly live on. Our Bronze Age: geography, people, and resources. In the place where the sun scorches dusty earth, where the two rivers Tigris and Euphrates wind through muddy fields and parched deserts, a strange thing occurred in human history. Humanity not only survived, but began to reorganize its own future. That land is called Mesopotamia, meaning between two rivers, and here, around 3,300 years before the Common Era, the Sumerian civilization rose, not because they had more land than others, but because they learned how to turn metal into social order. Copper, the red metal that transformed mud into cities. At the same time, technological advances began to appear at astonishing speed. The wheel, a symbol of civilization, was not initially used for transport but for pottery. Only later did the Sumerians mount wheels on carts used in agriculture and war. They were also the first to know how to fire bricks from clay, enabling the construction of multi-story structures, better able to withstand harsh climate. The ziggurat temples, with their towering tiers reaching skyward, were both religious centers and engineering feats, Even in transportation, they used flat-bottomed boats to move goods via canals and rivers, connecting city-states in an internal network. Copper tools helped them dig deeper, build wider, and control water more effectively. In Mesopotamia, technology was not a luxury. It was what sustained life. Before discussing copper, we must understand the unique geography of Mesopotamia. This land between two rivers had no gemstones, no dense forests, no high mountains, nor regular rainfall. Instead came mud, salt, and abrupt floods. But it was precisely because of this harshness that the Sumerians were compelled to innovate. They built levees, dug canals, divided water, and recorded everything. Mesopotamia offered no favors, except that it forced humans to become engineers. This is the paradox of history. The most unforgiving place became the birthplace of the first civilization. When the Sumerians discovered how to smelt copper ore, initially arsenic copper, they made a leap beyond traditional stone tools. For the first time, humans could forge more durable hoe blades to plow deeper, create weapons to protect grain stores, and craft wheels, hooks, nails, things that would support an entire city. From that point, Uruk, Lagash were no longer mere large villages. They became humanity's first city-states. There were temples, grain storage, payroll for workers, and clay tablets recording tax debts. This was the moment humans stopped living by rainy seasons and began living by production schedules, distribution registers, and administrative orders. When writing emerged to ledger accounts. During this expanding social complexity, a special group arose, priests and scribes. They didn't farm or build levees, but held clay tablets, standing between granaries and deities. They recorded everything, from the number of beer jars given to brickmakers to prayers offered to gods. In that world, whoever knew writing held the power to interpret reality. And for the first time in history, power came not from muscle or sword, but from a reed stylus and a wet clay tablet. Surprisingly, writing, one of humanity's greatest inventions, did not emerge to compose love poems or scripture. It emerged to keep warehouse accounts, track harvests, and manage debts. Sumerian clay tablets etched in cuneiform recorded numbers of wheat, beer portions for laborers, days of temple construction. Thus, the first civilization didn't begin with myths. It began with accounting, order, but not for all social classes gradually took shape. Excavations at Ur and Uruk revealed stark differences between wealthy and poor graves, one with crowns, weapons, musical instruments, the other just a hastily buried reed mat. The city was planned along vertical lines of power, temples high above, where priests served gods, laborer quarters lower, near marshes and waste. Even in death, hierarchy persisted, as if the Sumerians wanted to control not only the present, but the realm beyond. The rise of city-states and bronze tools brought agricultural surplus, allowing some people to abandon farming. They became priests, scribes, generals, and eventually kings. But what was the flip side of order? Those wielding tools could demand tribute from those without. Those who could write could rewrite history to their favor. And those in power began to call themselves representatives of the divine on earth. In this new world, where everything was recorded, delegated, controlled, humans first managed nature, but then began managing each other. As Mesopotamian city-states prospered, conflict was inevitable. With conflict began a new chapter in history, the era of empires. Sargon of Akkad, the founder of empire concept. According to legends inscribed in ancient Akkadian texts, Sargon was not a prince born in a palace. He was a child abandoned in a river, rescued and raised by a gardener, a motif echoed later in religious legends like Moses. From this start, he became the founder of one of humanity's first empires, its capital Akkad, still a mystery to archaeologists. Sargon did not conquer by sword alone. He established a centralized bureaucracy, assigned trusted officials to govern regions, controlling taxes and trade. Notably, he appointed his daughter Enheduanna as high priestess at Ur, using religion as political tool to unify conquered lands. Around 2334 years before the Common Era, a humble man from Akkad named Sargon emerged as a phenomenon. Not born into royalty, not raised in temples, Sargon began his career as a water-pouring servant for a priest. Yet from that low position, he ascended to the highest rank. He conquered southern city-states, uniting Sumer under his rule. Then he expanded northward, controlling the entire Tigris-Euphrates basin. For the first time in history, one human ruled dozens of different peoples, speaking many languages and living with varied traditions. The Akkadian Empire succeeded not merely through army, but through administration, communications and resource control. Trade routes were guarded, rest stations built for merchants, and copper and tin continued flowing from mountains to the plains. Bronze steles depicted Sargon standing between two rivers, a declaration that he had conquered not only land, but history. The world's first recorded war, east of Mesopotamia, across the Zagros Mountains, lay Elam, a civilization rivaling Sumer in organization and strength. Its capital, Susa, lay at the trade nexus between mountains and plains, controlling tin transport from Iran's highlands to Mesopotamia. Elam had long been a formidable rival to Sumerian city-states, not only rich in resources, but possessing refined bronze tools made with local tin. Though defeated in a battle around 2700 years before the Common Era, Elam did not collapse. They returned, attacked, and at times controlled Ur across centuries. Elam may be the oldest, most persistent rival across Sumerian, Akkadian, and later Babylonian history. Even before the Akkadian Empire took shape, circa 2700 years before the Common Era, history recorded one remarkable event: the first war written down by humans. An alliance of Sumerian city-states led by King Enmebaragesi of Kish attacked Elam, a rising kingdom in the eastern highlands, modern-day Iran, famous for tin, essential to bronze making. The Sumerians were victorious. Ancient records state they brought back Elamite weapons and prisoners as spoils. But Elam did not vanish. Instead, they survived another 1,000 years, periodically invading Mesopotamia and rebuilding power, becoming the longest-lasting adversary in the region's history. A clay tablet reads, "Kish defeated Elam," both a battle report and a warning. History begins when war is recorded. From conquest to organization, the new concept of power. Following his resounding victories, Sargon and his successors did not stop at occupation. They built a novel model of power, an empire not only inhabited by victors, but functioning as a machine to run conquered lands. The Akkadian administration was divided into provinces, each governed by a governor appointed from the center, tasked with collecting taxes, organizing labor, and protecting trade routes. These officials were typically Akkadian, helping the central authority maintain control and enabling a new ruling class locally. Another key development was merging political and religious power. Enheduanna, Sargon's daughter, was not only a priestess, but the first known named poet in human history. She composed hymns praising Inanna, bolstering legitimacy of Akkadian rule. This empire became the first proof that great conquerors were not just warriors, but those who converted conquest into governance. Sargon's Akkadian empire lasted nearly 180 years, a modest time by modern measures, but a full cycle of first centralized states. Here, for the first time in human history, taxes were collected from different regions in local produce. Laws were decreed per region, respecting local customs, and the king was seen not merely as the strongest warrior, but as chosen by the gods. It was not just a military empire, but an administrative empire founded on networks of distribution, records, and tin supply chains. Cylinder seals embossed with merchants, camels, carts, evidence that power then lay not only in sword, but in shipping invoices. After nearly 2 centuries of glory, the Akkadian Empire collapsed, not by a mighty army, but by a series of silent ruptures: drying climate, failed crops, rebel provinces, and finally, people descending from the mountains. They were called the Guti, living in the Zagros range, nomadic, with no fixed cities, no writing, and no temples. In Sumerian texts, they were described as monsters who do not speak our language. They do not bake bread, do not pray to gods, and live like wolves on the mountains. Images the Mesopotamians used to define themselves by opposing the other. The Guti left no grand temples or vast law codes, but their rise toppled Akkadian order and forced succeeding civilizations to redefine power, organization, and identity. In their vague uprising, the Guti resembled a wild wind, formless but shaking old ground so new seeds could grow. In the eyes of the Akkadians and Sumerians, the Guti embodied chaos. They do not know writing, do not know how to build temples, do not perform divine rites. Yet though seen as barbarian, the Guti became the heirs to humanity's first empire. When the destroyers learned to build, the Guti conquered the weakened city-states that remained, seizing cities once emblematic of Akkad. Initially, they did not know how to operate the inherited bureaucracy, but then they began to learn. They adopted agricultural techniques, record-keeping, and taxation systems from the very people they once preyed upon. They began building temples, enacting laws, and proclaiming themselves in the Sumerian language. Thus, the destroyer became the builder. History is not a straight line upward. It is a circle, where those called barbarians today may become civilized tomorrow. The Mesopotamian cycle, collapse, relearn, continue. Under Ur-Nammu and his successor Shulgi, the third dynasty of Ur elevated Mesopotamian social organization to an unprecedented level. It was the first time in human history that a centralized text-based administrative system was widely implemented. Warehouses were inventoried on clay tablets. Workers were rationed precisely, from bread, beer to cooking oil, based on rank and job. Local officials had clear duties, and daily records were kept as the ancient version of a national ledger. With the Ur-Nammu law code, inscribed in stone and copied on clay, the government for the first time publicly established consistent punishment, replacing arbitrariness. Ur III was not only a revival empire, it was the first planned empire in history. Around 2100 years before the Common Era, the Guti were overthrown by a Sumerian renaissance led by Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur, also called the Neo-Sumerian Empire. He rebuilt Mesopotamia on Akkadian models, but expanded them, issuing the first systematic law code even before Hammurabi, rebuilding the ziggurat at Ur, taller and stronger, as proof that Sumerian civilization had not died, extending influence to the shores of the Mediterranean. Yet even this revival empire eventually decayed and was replaced again by nomadic barbarians. This time, the Amorites. The Amorites, from the semi-arid western Syrian desert, were nomadic tribes relying on pastoralism and trade. They had no written language, no cities, but in the eyes of Sumerian elites, they were simply foreigners on the frontier. But the Amorites did not attack in waves like traditional enemies. They infiltrated through marriage, trade, and migration. Gradually, they gained control of power centers, not by conquest, but by integrating themselves into the system. They learned Akkadian, adopted Sumerian mythology, used old administrative models, and then led them. Among them emerged figures who would shape regional history. One was Hammurabi, inheriting and rewriting Mesopotamia's legacy into law. The Amorites were like mushrooms growing on collapsed walls, quietly, persistently, then dominating the entire landscape. Amorites from the western desert, herders, mobile, speaking another tongue. Sumer recorded them as a menace, a darkness spreading over the plains. Sumer built great walls to stop Amorites, but failed. A few generations later, the Amorites founded dynasties everywhere, ruled Babylon, and gave rise to Hammurabi, the king who would write the most famous ancient law code. The word barbarian was merely how the old called the new. Mesopotamian history is not just about battles. It is a cycle of adoption and succession. No one reigns forever. No one is permanently eliminated from the game. And history shows those labeled uncivilized often rebuild the world. One spring morning in 1595, years before the Common Era, Babylon, the new symbol of Eastern power, awoke to the clamor of iron horses and unfamiliar soldiers. These were not troops from Egypt, nor from Elam. They came from far to the north, over 2,000 kilometers away, the Hittites. A strike from the north, not to rule, but to pillage. Mursili I of the Hittite Empire led his army over the Taurus Mountains, across the Euphrates River, through the city-states of central Mesopotamia, and struck directly at Babylon. He did not come to establish an empire. He did not aim to spread religion or expand territory. Ancient records state Mursili's goal was nothing but treasure and fame. After the raid, he turned around immediately and retreated back to Hittite lands, only to be assassinated shortly thereafter. The event shook the Near East. A center of civilization collapsed, and no one replaced it. It was a blow to the heart of history, so swift that people never even had time to scream. Mursili I of Hittite led his troops over the Taurus, across the Euphrates, through Mesopotamia's city-states, striking Babylon head-on. What's astonishing is, he did not stay to occupy, did not establish governors, did not declare a new empire. Instead, he pillaged the treasury, took captives, and retreated. Not all empires fall to rival empires. Some disappear simply because of one clean, decisive raid. The fracture in history, when everything falls into the hands of the unexpected. Babylon's collapse left a massive power vacuum. Who would fill it? Not Elam, not Assyria, but a mountain people, the Kassites, once marginal, now seizing the opportunity. The Kassites did not conquer by force. They took over Babylon, rebuilt it, learned Akkadian, worshipped Babylonian gods. They had no writing system of their own, no original ideology, but they knew how to preserve what existed by copying, archiving, and continuing the bureaucracy of a civilization they didn't create. They renamed Akkadian gods with Kassite pronunciation, but left the religious hierarchy intact. They learned cuneiform writing. They left administrative texts and chronicles, and maintained Babylon for nearly 400 years. A library that was not burned, but meticulously copied by former nomads. Babylon's fall left a vast void. Who would fill it? Not Elam, not Assyria, but the Kassites, once outsiders, now the successors. They were the inheritors, not the inventors. Yet history chose them as the next keepers of the records. A library not burned, but carefully transcribed by former nomads. When the world has to learn again, through a law code. Amid this turbulent period, just before Babylon fell, an Amorite king named Hammurabi did something unprecedented. He wrote laws, publicly, carved them in stone. The Code of Hammurabi comprised nearly 300 articles displayed in public, opening with the declaration, "I, the king chosen by the gods, am charged with protecting the weak from the strong." The stone stele was not just legal text, it was a political, religious, ethical declaration. Hammurabi carved an image of the god Shamash, god of justice, handing him a scepter, sanctifying his power by divine right. In a world fracturing into violence, he chose to raise a stone hammer. It wasn't the first law code, but it was the first time humanity made laws a public declaration for society. And while empires fell, the stone endured. When the world descended into violence, the one who wrote the law rewrote the order. The fall of Babylon didn't end the Bronze Age, but it triggered its finale. A world once connected by pottery, grain, bronze, and tin became a battlefield of looted goods. And history, instead of marching forward, began to lurch, as if someone had pressed the reset button. Among all those who destroyed and killed, the one who left the deepest mark was the one who could write. Not every empire fell from war, not due to assassination or abandonment by gods, but because it could not feed its people, could not repair its wagons, could not deliver letters in season. That is what happened around 1200 years before the Common Era, when the entire Bronze Age world plunged into darkness simultaneously. The first dominoes, Mycenae, Hattusa, Ugarit, all gone. In less than a century, 3 major Eastern Mediterranean hubs vanished entirely. Mycenae, once famed as the conquerors of Troy, was destroyed, abandoned, never rebuilt. Hattusa, the iron-fisted capital of the Hittite Empire, burned, with its cuneiform archives lost in ashes. Ugarit, the port city bridging east and west, sent a final plea and then vanished before a reply arrived. Its last letter, written in cuneiform and found in the ruins, read, "The enemy is inside. The city is burning. The granary is empty. No reinforcements yet." That letter was never sent. The messenger may have been killed, the ship destroyed. Yet over 3,000 years later, we can still read it. A world once communicating by contract now couldn't even send a farewell. The problem wasn't the enemy, but grain, wood, and tin. Grain from the Nile Valley, cedar wood from Lebanon, tin from Iran or distant Britain. All depended on transport networks spanning thousands of miles. Tin, scarce but essential, transformed soft copper into strong bronze for weapons, tools, and statues. Yet none of Mesopotamia, Egypt, or the Levant had tin. It came from far-off regions, Perhaps Cornwall, the Iranian Plateau, or the Altai Mountains. One raided depot, one blocked road, one destroyed port, and the system failed. No tin, no swords, no power. Symbol: a small tin mine could topple a civilization. Grain from the Nile, cedar from Lebanon, tin from far away, all relying on thousands of miles of transport. Wood, a humble material, was the lifeblood of coastal civilizations, for ships, temple columns, storage sheds. When Lebanon's cedars were over-harvested, empires couldn't maintain ships, navigate seas, or import tin for forging swords. No wood, nothing else worked. When climate shifted, local wars erupted, famines spread, the entire supply chain collapsed. The empire that survived longest was the one that could store, negotiate, compromise. But in the end, all lost to seasonal rhythms and weather. Not swords, but broken wheels collapsed the chariot. Grain, wood, tin, all dependent on those fragile networks. When climate changed, war flared locally, famine grew, the whole system collapsed. The empire that survived longest was the one storing, bargaining, and yielding. But eventually, all fell to the weather schedule. Not swords, but a broken wheel ended the chariot. Strangers from the sea, or desperate migrants. Blame fell on a group called the Sea Peoples. They came by boat, raiding Egypt, Syria, Anatolia. We don't know their origins. They may have been famine migrants or abandoned mercenaries. Egyptian records etched images of sea people wearing kilts, round shields, curved swords, with the caption, "They came like a storm, but Pharaoh stood firm." But in truth, no one stood firm. A network of civilizations burned, not by a powerful enemy, but by a fragile world. Sometimes, the invaders were merely the longest delayed victims. No epic celebrates those starving outside the granaries. No heroes praised for patching ships to fetch tin. But that's how an era ends. And from those ruins, a new world rises, with iron and alphabets and lessons no one will learn. When Mycenae abandoned its palaces, when the Hittites stopped passing crowns, when Ugarit's letters never reached their destination, people didn't call it the end of the world. They simply called it the year without tin. And so, an era ended, not with a battle, but with empty storehouses. Today, we are more confident, with containers, satellites, blockchain, and artificial intelligence. But at the heart of the modern economy are still tin ingots that keep the world spinning, from microchips to fertilizers. A ship stuck in a canal, a drought in the Mekong Basin, a factory shut in Taiwan, and the whole world feels what Babylon felt in 1595 before the Common Era. History doesn't teach us how to avoid collapse. It only reminds us that every empire, no matter how grand, will forget to check inventory at precisely the worst moment.